Hi, and welcome to Behind the Scenes, a monthly video series where our staff shares sewing tips, easy how-tos, and more. I'm your host, Lindsay Mayland. We have a great show ahead of us today covering a wide variety of topics, so we hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Lindsay. Welcome to the American Patchwork and Quilting Sewing Studio.
We're going to take you on a little tour today. We remodeled this space during the pandemic, so we haven't had a great chance to show it off yet. So we wanted to talk about some different areas that we set up in this room to really make it very functional for us. So we have different things that we need to do in this room. We shoot videos, so this is our video backdrop, which you may recognize. And then we also have some different spaces around the room for other things as well. So this is kind of our cute space. So this is kind of propped out. It's not too cluttered. This isn't all of our storage, obviously, but we do have our AccuQuilt machine, and then we do store some dies down in the closed storage. And that's what we really like about these bookcases, is we have some open for display, and then we have some closed storage for some more functional storage there. And then we also have a design wall over here, which is really functional for laying out any of our projects that we're working on.
In the center of the room, we have a cutting table, and we actually custom made this. We bought an adjustable table base and then added a butcher block cut to the right size. And then we love that it's on wheels because we can move it wherever we need to be cutting if we need to be closer to our workstation. And like we said, it's adjustable, so when you pull this out, it actually can go lower and higher, so it works great for all of our staff who are different heights. So once that's at a good height for whoever's cutting, they can just secure it and then start cutting.
We have this really big back wall that we wanted to display quilts on. So we got this amazing track system. It's really flexible because you can put these little accessories in anywhere you would like to along the track, and then they hang down and have different accessories you can put on to hang quilts. You can even hang pictures. So this is really great when we want to display some of our quilts and kind of have this be a rotating gallery wall. And then we also have a couple of quilt ladders in the room as well that we can display quilts there too.
This wall holds most of the items in our sewing studio. So because we had so much to store, we did not want it to look cluttered, so we chose all of the same white bins throughout, so they're not see-through, so it all looks very uniform and neat, but we needed to know what was inside each bin. So we did add labels to each bin so we could easily find what we were looking for. Now we kept the most common tools, like scissors, snips, bobbins, threads, right in our eye line so we can easily see and grab them. And things we use less often, we put on the top and bottom because those are harder to reach. So we also have these clear containers, which do hold our sewing machine tools for everything. So it's nice to keep those out because a lot of the specialty feet, extra tools are in here, so we don't have to store them by the sewing machine, but they are handy. Another great way to update cube storage is you can get these dividers. So you can see these have them here, and that just allows us to fit 2 of the smaller bins in one spot.
This is the long arm section of our studio, and I did want to point out how we positioned the frame in the space. So instead of having it be up against a wall, we have it coming out into the room, and we're facing the other side of the room. So that way, if there are other people working in here, you don't feel like you are in a corner by yourself. You can still interact with the other people in the space. And we do love having this here so that we can finish more of our quilts.
A pegboard is a great thing to have in your sewing space. So when we set ours up, we made sure that all of our most used supplies were on display here. So anything our staff wanted to just grab and take to their workspace. So we have on pegs, all of rulers, cutting tools. We have some cups up here that hold smaller items like seam rippers and point turners. We have a thread rack to store some common colors of thread. And of course, a cute little sign that welcomes people to our space. And then down here we have some more storage, but on top we wanted it pretty. So there's cute little displays of rulers, thread, pin cushions, markers, things that we could use, but that are cute, And then of course in these down here, we hide the things that aren't as pretty. So we have things like batting down here. It's like an explosion when you open it, but these are things we want to hide away, but we still want to have handy.
Over here on this wall, we have our pressing station. So we've got our ironing board, and then we have this great little cart that we have an iron, we've got some spray starch, and some little fusibles. So fusibles are kind of hard to store, but if you can corral them in a little bin, that definitely helps, and it looks a lot cuter. And then the nice thing with this cart is we can roll it over to one of the other stations if we want to press over by the machine or in a different spot in the room. And kind of the same thing with our cans and our bottles. They're kind of hard to corral, so we have this cute little container, and they just look a lot neater in this rather than just sitting open on the shelf.
So we have a second cutting table in this space too. This one is a little taller and it has built-in storage. Now this cutting table and the sewing table you see behind us were actually custom made for us by our friends at Wood Magazine, which we're very thankful for because it's nice to have something that fits your needs. So this cutting table specifically has a slot in it underneath that stores all of our extra mats. And then it also has storage on both ends with shelving where we can store, you saw the ironing tools on this side, and then we have some more cutting mats and cutting tools on that side. So it's very convenient to have the storage and have it be a functional piece. And of course we love the sewing table behind us has the drop-in sewing machine feature so that we can have a smooth table with the sewing machine at the height of the table, which is really nice. Thanks so much for joining us on this tour of our sewing studio. We hope you liked it and liked seeing the space that we spend time in.
If you'd like to shop our space, we'll put links in the video description on the products that are still available.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Stumbo. Today I wanted to share with you my latest quilt top finish, and it is this very special quilt that I am giving to a friend for her very first baby. The baby's due in just a couple of months and we're having a shower for her in a few weeks, so I was able to finish this just in time. Now, she does not have a very specific theme to her nursery or color palette, so I was really confused on what to do for this baby quilt. So I decided to include her in my fabric selection process. So we made a fun day of it and we visited 3 different quilt shops in town before we finally ended up picking this line of fabric from Grunge Fabrics from Moda. And she just loves the color purple and she loves silver. So it's a little bit non-traditional as far as the baby quilt goes, but I'm so glad I involved her in that process because I know it's something she will absolutely love and treasure. So I worked on this quilt top at a staff quilt retreat back in November, and it was such a good experience. I was so grateful that they had a design wall at the retreat center, which is something I don't have in my own home. Although this quilt pattern is pretty simple to construct, it is really important where you place those fabrics. So you get this kind of interlocking star pattern. So that design wall was so essential in the success of this pattern. I ended up staying up really late that very last night at the retreat just to finish it, but it was worth it. I quilted this on my own machine at home because it was small enough that I felt like I could handle it. And I just did some simple quilt in the ditch quilting on it, kind of mimicking the star pattern. And one of my goals for 2023 was to be better at adding quilt labels. And I'm happy to say that I made my very first quilt label, and it was not as intimidating as I thought it was going to be. I am not very great at my handwriting. I'm not very comfortable with it. I don't love it. So I decided to mock this up on a computer first using a couple different fonts. And then I simply traced that onto the fabric using a fabric safe pen. And just to add a little bit special detail to it, I followed the cursive writing with embroidery floss, just using a simple split back stitch. And I just thought that added such a nice touch to it, and it's one of my favorite parts to this whole quilt. And I cannot wait to give this to my friend at her baby shower, and even better, I can't wait to meet her little baby.
Hi, I'm Doris, the editor of Patchwork and Quilting. I'm excited to share some great reader tips about storage today. This first tip comes from Laura Kallenbach from Portage, Wisconsin. Laura says, I have a large zippered bag I call my finishing bag. It's where I store fabrics I need for backing, binding, and labeling my UFOs. I attach a note to the individual fabric pieces to remind me which project each one is for. That way I don't accidentally cut into the yardage I was saving for a particular quilt. That's a great idea. You can keep your pattern, your tools, and all the fabric you need with the UFO right there in a zipper bag. Carol Metz of Grass Lake, Michigan says, because I was tired of forgetting what my specialty rulers were meant to do, I sewed a block of every design that each ruler would make. I then named file folders after the rulers and put the finished block inside the folder with the ruler and the instructions. I no longer have to guess what the blocks will look like when they're finished. This next tip is from Beth Christopher from Bramville, West Virginia. She says I use a pedicure toe separator to store my bobbins. The bobbins stay wound and I can see the color of the thread. Nancy Kovacs of Curtis, Ohio says, I love my fabric panels, but they often get lost in my stash. After trying several storage methods, I finally hit on something that works for me. I fold each panel into a page protector and store the page protectors in binders. This cuts down on duplicate panels, makes the panels easy to view, and keeps the panels accessible. And our last tip is from Norma Curtis of Kleinburg, Ontario. She says, because our sewing room is also our guest room, I sometimes need to put my sewing supplies away to store my cutting mats where they won't get bent. I clip them to pants hangers and stash them in the closet. The hanger clips are strong enough to hold 2 mats each.
Hi, I'm Beth with American Patchwork and Quilting. I'm sharing some tips today for making flying geese and also making sure that your points are nice and crisp. You want to make sure you're sewing really precisely on these flying geese units so that they turn out accurately. So I've got my square with the diagonal line drawn on it and my rectangle, and I'm about to sew these together. So first thing I do is I always turn on my laser light. This is built right into this baby lock chorus, which I love. It really helps me with my accuracy. So when you line up your laser light with that line, you can make sure that you're staying exactly on the line as you go throughout the piece. You're not getting a weird angle or you're not going to get all wavy as long as you're following that laser light. It's really super helpful. And then I also like to start on this longer side when I'm sewing rather than the point. So if you start on the point, your machine just doesn't have as much to grab onto there with the feed dogs. It can get pulled down into your machine. So I like to start on this side. You'll just get a much smoother start. Next, I'm going to add my second square to the other side of the rectangle. On this one, I do find if I'm trying to start from that straight edge, it isn't as easy to start this time because now I've got a seam and it's pressed this way, so it's a little bulkier, and the seam is going in the direction toward the machine, so sometimes that can get flipped as it's pulling through. So I do find that that sometimes results in a little bit less of a nice point than I would like. So I do like to start from the point on my second square. So I always like to start with a leader strip, and I just use these little corners that I just trimmed off. It's a great way to use those tiny little pieces that I wasn't going to use for anything else. And then if you do find that you're having a lot of trouble with that point being pulled down into your machine, then you can switch to a straight stitch plate. So a lot of machines come with these. This Baby Lock Chorus did, and this just has a much smaller hole for the needle, so you have less surface area there for that point to be pulled down into your machine. Just remember though that this can only be used with straight stitching, so be sure to switch this back out if you're going to do any zigzag or any other needle adjustments, or you'll break a needle. When I was making these, I started from that long edge when I added my second square, and you can see it just kind of eats that a little bit, that seam, and then I feel like it shifts a little and it's just not quite as accurate. But try both ways and see which one works best for you. Now, when you go to sew your Flying Geese units together, you want to get a nice crisp point between those two units. So let me show you this. So if this is happening to you a lot, where you're getting this kind of blunted tip, or the tip is hidden in the seam allowance, as opposed to having a nice crisp point here, then likely your seam allowance is a little too large. So I'll flip this over so you can see here. So the intersection right here is the point of our Flying Geese unit. And you can see our stitching line has gone into that point. So you need to bump your stitching line back so that it's either hitting right there at that intersection, or even just a little bit shy of that intersection, so that you get a nice crisp point. So I'm going to sew my two Flying Geese units together. I know a lot of times when I'm doing this, this is the side that ends up, but now I can't see what's happening with the point on the other side. So if you flip it over, then I can watch that intersection of the seam and make sure I'm not going to cut my point off. This is another place that I love to use this laser, because I can see as I'm lining this up if I'm going to be too far over and lose that point, or if I'm going to be right on the intersection or a little scant. So you can make your adjustments before you start sewing, which is extremely helpful, and I know that that is going to be a nice point. Here are the 3 completed blocks using the Crossweave collection from Moda Fabrics. This is such a beautiful line with rich colors and just a gorgeous texture. I did a little rainbow here, and I love how that gives it a sense of movement around the block.
And that's it for today's show. Thanks to everyone who watched. We really hope that you enjoyed it. And we know we talked through a lot of things today, so in the video description, you can find a link where we list all of the patterns, products, resources, and more. So make sure you check that out, and we will see you next month.